thank you for being here to listen to us. And it's a great pleasure and a privilege and an honor for me to chair this session with Professor Marc POTENZA, who is somebody it's very difficult not to know him. Thank you, Marc, for being next to me for this session, which I hope will be of interest for all of you. So I'm starting, and I don't have my slideshow, my presentation. So we're going to begin with the presentation by Patrick, and I'll finish. I think it's perhaps more coherent.
I'm very grateful for Professor Amine BENYAMINA to be chairing this, and grateful for the audience's interest in this important topic. So without further ado, perhaps Patrick, you can begin.
Thank you very much. Est-ce que je prends un micro? Oui, je vais mettre la main, je vais pas rester estrade. OK.
Thank you very much for being here this afternoon, and thank you to the organisers and moderators of this session. I'm going to try in 15-20 minutes to explain to you certain strategies, both collective and individual, to promote regulated screen use. And it is a real topical subject today. There are strategies, there are things that we can do. So I'd like to discuss this with you in terms of safety and monetization of personal data. So the stakes we all know, of course, are digital and societal evolution, and there are different ways of using it. We may say a lot of stupid things when we compare different types of screens. I have my sister who's working on Word, my kids are playing online games, which activate certain negative values like cheating, for example. So we have to be very careful when we're talking about screens because it's very hard to be precise. The appearance of AI, which is we're going from doing things to getting things done. And this is a true revolution. We're in the beginning of this revolution. I'm 57. I think I need to get on board the train before it's too late. And I use this a lot. We have a growing importance in human psychological ecology, increasing concerns by parents about the use of screens by children, the important place of captology, and a debate around what is normal and what is pathological, because we talk about regulated uses. We can't ban everything, and the use of screens is an excellent support to talk about behavioral addictions with craving, the loss of control, and accumulated damage. So this is a very useful subject to think about what is normal and what is pathological. I'd like to go through this very quickly. I'll try to summarize here some of the data, validated data concerning damage, sedentarity, obesity, technoference. It's the screens. We have a lack of critical thought due to sleep disorders, depression, and anxiety, maybe even vulnerability, and all those physical disorders. Then we have the toxic photo effect of blue light, etc., etc. Other considerations, the importance of stolen time. I say I'm going to spend a certain amount of screen time, a quarter of an hour, And then at home, I doom scroll for an hour and a half, and I don't manage to stick within the time that I allocated myself. We have the impact of social media and stereotypes that are created, especially on social networks, especially objectification of women, hate speech. For the last 2 months, people have to prove their age on certain websites. So when they connect via a VPN, a foreign address, they can get round these controls very easily. I'm not very good with the tech this afternoon. So if we talk about regulation in general terms, what can we do and what will happen in terms of public action? I think that only public action is going to help to regulate, to break the GAFAs or the big tech giants. From my point of view, public action is important because they compete against each other. None of them are going to stop themselves. It's either make or break. So we need to, as far as they're competing against each other, none of them is going to try to put a brake on their action. The job is to create screen time, to get people addicted. So if we can't get them to regulate it, then government needs to do it. There are strategies and very powerful methods to get you addicted to screens. It's important that we don't trust them. We also have to base ourselves on scientific data, and which are conclusive, and recommendations which can fluctuate according to data as it comes in. If we have a look now at what's happening in other countries, I've taken the example of Australia. They have an e-safety commissioner. From the 25th of December this year, there will be no social media before the age of 16. And this is not just a ban. It's you need to. This even concerns opening an account. Not so much a ban, but delaying opening accounts. Accountability of internet service providers who are partly responsible. In the UK, we have the Online Safety Act. So beyond regulation by an independent body, they have tried to cover algorithms. So the job is to. We also talk about freedom of speech and information, disinformation. We know that the media and the companies want to buy media companies to disseminate information, not always fake information, but alternative information. And we need to define what are the criminal offences. And the aim is to regulate and make people aware in terms of data safety. It's a very important process. In China, you know that in China, quite a long time ago, they implemented quotas for minors. In 2019, it was 90 minutes on weekdays and then 3 hours at weekends. And since then, it was changed 1 hour in the evening on weekends. So this is really regulated very heavily. The people get round it. So in terms of action and efficiency, it was there was an effect. And so not only was there little effect on public health, but also for the stakeholders, there was very negative effects. The Chinese TikTok is called Douyin, and the mother company, I can't remember the name, but with Douyin, they have developed the platform in China, and they're like in France, TikTok is becoming more and more commercial. They exchanged $460 million, billion dollars in shares. In the US, they've promoted what's called the Family Media Plan. I suggest that you have a look at this. It's really well done. I've tested it. It works in French as well. And you can advise families. You can register. You get into your data. You have to, of course, be careful with that. But there's a whole process for negotiating the time spent in front of screens. And you say what you do, and you need to say what you do and do what you say. And it's a very useful tool. We implemented this in my family, and one Sunday afternoon, we negotiated screen use within our family. Education in how to use media, focus on consequences, sedentarity, mental health, disorders, and for our online gaming. In France, there's the BENYAMINA report, In Search of Lost Time, with the recommendation, no social media before the age of 15. Public Health France, there's a survey that came out recently, the NEB. Then there's the project, Less Screens, More Interactions. Try to see that screens don't talk to us personally, and that they are not suitable in the construction of young people's minds. And then, in France, we need to publish strategies with the GDRP. In 2016, you know that all AI, apart from Mistral, all AI, the data set is stored in the US, whereas Mistral is, the data is stored in France. This is important because the Americans, there's the Patriot Act, and the Patriot Act enables, if they consider that the country is in danger, they can go and verify all data on their servers. And from one point of view, this is something where we have to be very careful. When you give it personal information on AI, you have to be very careful to regulate it, I think. I used to be work in IT before I was a doctor. So from my point of view, I think we are really behind on this subject. This making data safe, and people just send it onto the internet without even thinking about it. We have the DSA and DMA legislation at European level. The Europeans are active. There are European acts which prevent GAFAM marketing in Europe. There are rules. The Digital Service Act from May 2023, which limits the dissemination of illegal content and the sale of illegal products online. The algorithms which generate targeted advertising on YouTube. Says help us do a survey to work better. But of course you give loads of personal data. You shouldn't fill it in. It's forbidden for minors to take part in this. There's a DMA. It imposes certain interoperability and limits dominant positions, for example, on Microsoft. The DMA is an antitrust law for screens applicable to Europe. So we can't say that Europe is completely inactive. It's not true. In terms of policy now, public policy, health recommendations, regulation at school and education in digital tools, laws concerning the accountability of platforms which are at least partly responsible for the content they disseminate, regulating and verifying users' ages, limiting duration of exposure, support for parents, and countermeasures to screens. In order to get kids off screens, we need to organise more sports, more things outside. These are true countermeasures. The problem of the screens is not just of screens itself, it's a problem in terms of policy and what alternatives exist which are going to attract kids rather than screens. There are individual regulation tools and strategies in terms of captology. All the strategy, these are important. It's important we have public policy, of course, but this is very pragmatic, and I put in green the following points: what can help us and what we can do to get less trapped by the system. 3 big systems are primarily involved in our attention captivating process: alertness, orientation, where you're directed, and the executive regulatory system. This is important to me, it corresponds to my values, or this is not important, or I don't want to do this. And the science of captology, what's happening. Notifications remind users about the presence of screens. We then, through algorithms, there will be an anticipation, behavioral design to influence the user's expectations for our algorithmic strategy, and they try to keep the user immersed in this environment, in this virtual digital world, to mask all the damage that's been done by the system. The digital operators' strategies are to develop persuasive technologies which work on an infraconscious level to reduce the user to simple, basic reflexes. Tristan Harris, who worked on ethics at Google, he says technology is hijacking our minds. So the ethics of GAFA is very questionable. They want to make use very easy, generate and maintain your attention, and to mask the perception of damage that they do. Captology. There are loads of techniques. There's the first one, doom scrolling. You're on an internet web page. There's no end. It can last hours. It's what we call the penis effect. If you have if you give people a marker, then they will realize where they are. Videos in autoplay. I don't even have to go and get the information. It comes to me on its own. And they play one after the other to keep me immersed in this world. The duration of these videos is calculated according to the average time I spend on videos. This is to keep the state of flow, a feeling of plenitude, and this will reduce our critical treatment processing of information. On your WhatsApp, you send a message. You see these little dots because somebody is answering you. That's there to stop you from turning it off because you're excited about the response arriving. So it keeps you a few more seconds on WhatsApp. And during this time, they could perhaps send you an ad or something. Calibrating time, for example, Netflix has series lasting 30 to 40 minutes because to watch series, 1 hour is too long. Users under 50 are not available for any longer, so they calibrate the average time of series to keep you held as long as possible. And obviously they have an advertising, colours and design. So what can we do? Firstly, we need to educate people, users, in digital tools. A lot of teachers are interested in this. So digital education. I've just put the most important points, but we could spend hours talking about this. These are very powerful strategies. We need to explain to people what are strategies. For example, notifications. If you're not satisfied, you have to reply. You reply to you end up with people replying to a notification for some company and yet refusing a call from your own husband or wife. It's the job of these companies to sell, and they do it very well. Put your telephone in black and white, and it'll be a lot less advertising. Your screen in black and white. If it's too difficult, at least do it in the week. Just do it over a weekend. It doesn't cost anything. It's efficient, and it enables your telephone to be less attractive. Variable reinforcement and notification. There are variable rewards, likes, comments, and expected content. It's like how much uncertainty plus intermittence is going to create anxious, repetitive behavior. Notifications is important because what's it for? It's there to let me take an example to show you how far they get. In Instagram, a friend sends me a video or something on Instagram. It's 4 o'clock when I'm working. I look at it and I say, I'm working. He sends me an Instagram video. I looked at it. I send a comment. I say, it's fabulous. Instagram knows that my friend is working at 4, so it'll keep his like, and it'll keep my like, and send it back to him at 6 p.m. because it knows that my friend will be available to spend more time on Instagram, and he'll be able to go onto an ad. It's an operational and very efficient strategy. These are true commercial strategies to get you to spend as much screen time as possible. Then there's the idea of thrill, stimulation. It's visual, it's and sound. It's called a thrill. And then we also have, I'm doing something, I receive a message, and it's something that's not important. So I stopped all my notifications, and we recommend that people deactivate all notifications on their smartphones except for SMSs because they could be useful, and of course telephone calls because of course originally a telephone is a telephone to make calls. I've done it. And I feel completely liberated. When I have time available, then I go and look at my messages. I go on WhatsApp, etc. But I don't let myself get distracted by things that are against my values throughout the day. So we should almost be angry against those who impose this. These companies will bombard you with messages asking for your customer. Why should you spend your time calibrating your profile in order to make profits, the profits of companies, bigger? We need to get back to reasonable screen time. Our compasses are our moral values. And that's for what's important to us as human beings. Let's continue. Algorithmic personalization of feeds. Algorithms sort and reorder content to maximize engagement, to generate clicks in emotional reaction and time spent. For example, Florent Pagny's Ale, new drama at Florent Pagny's house. something to grab your attention, but in fact it's not true at all. These seats create emotions, they create stories to get you hooked and click on ads as much as possible so as the gaffers can earn more money. They want to create reinforcement loops which increase the number of visits on their platform. If I say if I put my profile on the internet, this enables gaffers to profile me and to better target me with their ads. The GRPD is it's a question of security, so be careful with personal branding, cookies, the trace and customer feedback. Spend more time looking after the people you really care about. The design now. I found several studies. I put it at the bottom. This is very interesting. 112 arcs or as tips to trap us and manipulate us so that we pay more attention to certain events. Here are just some of them: fallacious graphic interface, pop-ups, and non-refusable cookies, because some sites no longer allow you to refuse cookies. Facebook, that's my generation, of course. You can't. So we have pop-up cookies, non-refusable. Roach Motel, you can't unsubscribed. Nagging. Privacy securing. We steal your personal information and then follow you. We had tricky questions, ambiguous nudges, loads of nudging strategies to get you onto, to grab your attention and then push you to consume, and then to actually spread the message on your social network. That's why I say you shouldn't ask. Then there's viral lift, the confusion between an ad and an article. You read something that looks like an article, in fact it's an ad. What do we need to do? Educate people, again. We need to notify any spam, to report any spam. And we need to be careful with our personal data and personal branding, which is very important. I don't go on Twitter. I don't put anything except my title and and the fact that I'm a father. Psychographic segmentation and targeted advertising. They will adopt different designs and user profiles to better target advertising and commercial offers. A predictive behavioral model and vulnerability. And then we try to grab your attention, sexualize, fallacious, even on YouTube, which is not a Puritan network, but in your preferences it will say, it will show, for example, female anatomy to stimulate you. They try to get through to our deepest inner person. The idea is always to get you to click and for them to trap you. So what you need to do, refuse the cookies, don't answer surveys, and always use ad blockers. And try to find meaning in what you do. That's perhaps the most important. If what I'm doing now, does it make sense? Should I spend an hour looking at funny videos at home when I get back after work? But has it got any meaning? Or should I say, I do 15 minutes, I set an alarm, and I limit myself to that? When you've got work to do at home, intellectual work, if you scroll for a quarter of an hour, haven't you found that it's very difficult to get back to work because you're going from passive back to active mode, and You need to go and get real motivation to be creative and concentrate again. The result is that we make less effort. Sleep disorders, that's is very closely related to captology. It's very difficult to sleep after you've been on the phone. All the cognitive tasks remain open in your mind. There's a Ukrainian psychologist who found that I give each of you 20 tasks to do, and you have 30 minutes. And then she says stop at the end. And several days later, she comes back and says, what did I ask you to do? And the children remember the tasks they didn't finish, whereas they had forgotten the finished tasks. When you play online games, it's always there, it's always on in the background. We have a multiplication of screens in the household. If we like to surf on the internet, you need to put night shift on your phone. A lot of teens do this today. No screens 2 hours before you go to bed. Respect age limits, and no screens in the bedroom. Coercitive measures, institutional measures. We should consolidate binding rules on dark patterns and persuasive design. Algorithmic transparency and independent audits. We need to be able to see if the big tech giants' algorithms actually respect the rules. We need to put, for example, a timer on when we look at a particular website, limited notifications, know your autoplay, a legal framework for attention sovereignty, limiting the monetization of people's attention span, a black or a white list of patterns to eliminate dark patterns. Because, and then an obligation for independent impact tests on GAFA algorithms. The limitations and challenges, we need to define the frontier between acceptable persuasion and manipulation. Persuasion is useful for public health, for education, if it's provided that it's ethical. It has to be ethical motivation. Transnational application, internationally coordinate the regulations, and we need to innovate and get and deal with the companies constantly getting around. The authorities need to always keep control of the GAFAs. If you have, with this with the Scouts, if you have digital detox, you actually get the teenagers collaborating with each other. The take-home message, key takeaway, we need a scientific and ethical approach. This is more important than a moral approach in terms of screen use. If teens play on games for 5 hours, the mother says to the doctor, "Tell if the son is not, he likes playing football, he's got a girlfriend." But somebody, for example, who collects stamps but spends no time with the family, that's also a behavioural addiction. So we need to make sure that we're giving it the right label. If there's no inform users about attention saving, vigilance in terms of private data, monetization, persuasion, and manipulating information, and think and increase awareness of policies in a much more ethical regulatory framework. and if there's still time left. And to finish, thank you for listening to me. Saint-Exupéry said, there's no solution to problems. There's only forces afoot. We need to know how to create movement, and the solutions will follow. We'll perhaps field a couple of questions because it was quite a long presentation, and we won't necessarily have a lot of enough time to discuss the end. Would anyone like to ask a question to Dr. BENDIMERAD? Just a remark. You said that when you compare somebody who does sports as compared to who does a screen, I'm perhaps from the older generation, but what about reading? Reading can help. It's an exercise. It's very important to focus and to remain connected efficiently. I'm 100%, I agree with you 100%. It's important, and it's something I think is worth mentioning. Reading is recent in human evolution, but we go back over what we read, and screens, we don't have time to think about what's being said. Parents 2 centuries ago were worried about children reading and gaining information from sources outside the family circle. So the societal concerns are repeating themselves. Screens do have this passive aspect to them. And which brings us, gaffers, their job is to sell you time. They're not here to do charity.
Presentation, which will be from Amine BENYAMINA, who will be talking about children and screens. What are the recommendations?
Thank you, Marc. Prendre le micro sur ton CV. Il y a un truc pour bouger les slides. Ça marche.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for having started talking. I think you've just about said everything. I'm just going to explain how all of this was organized and explain how this commission came into being. So we'll get the slides up on the screen. Thank you. Patrick mentioned this, Children and Screens in Search of Lost Time. This is the title of the report that we gave to the President of the Republic. And I wanted to explain how we became interested in this subject, which has almost become viral. It's a subject which is important for society, not only our own society, but I want to show how we were approached to produce this report. The Commission, which is presented by my colleague Dr. Servan Mouton, who is a neurologist in Lyon, and myself, we were contacted, I don't know, summer, I think 2023, by the Élysée, the presidential departments, asked us whether we were going to think about the issue of addiction to screens. He talked about addiction, but it's a broader subject than that. And I said, yeah, it's in principle, I agreed. And I didn't know the proposal of the members of the Commission. And they suggested that we should be co-chairs with Dr. Servan Mouton, somebody that we met during the summer and the beginning of the autumn. And we spoke to all of the members of the Commission. That's important to try and explain how, finally, We had some rather complicated discussions. The commission was made up of people, not doctors, a researcher in epidemiology, Grégoire Bourse, who's a psychologist, working on child and adolescent development. Axel Dessin, who's director of digital education program, and Florent Gessel, who was is a researcher in private law at Stanford. Marie-Caroline Messier was director of the Canopé network. It's a network for teachers in the national system for continuous training. That's important. A colleague who works in the Polytechnique in Paris, who is head of the Science and Video Games Teaching and Research Chair, Grégory Verret, who's co-director of a startup which specializes in teaching children how to navigate the internet, and Celia Zelinsky, who's a professor of private law and criminal sciences, and I'll say why this is a particularly useful member. Two people who were reporters of the work of the Commission during the 4 months we spent together, Carole Bousquet-Bérard, who was the director of the cabinet, the minister's cabinet, and Alexandre Pascal. So when you see this group, it has some very broad variety of relations with screens. Some people live from screens, and others are fighting against screens. And the President of the Republic explained that he began to be interested in this subject after the riots in the urban districts, where young people became difficult to control because the information intelligence services had identified networks as a tool, Snapchat and so on, that were used by them to communicate. So they reported to the president saying that there was a community of thought and communication and leadership within the social networks, and gradually, personally and his teams began to show an interest in this subject. The context for consideration was quite simple. It's a social phenomenon. The growing role of screens in our society, particularly among young people, the existence of various studies on the possible impacts of screens. It was there when we started our work with soft data and observations and editorialized effects. Not very much information, but with a robust methodology and so on, which can mean that we can conclude about a certain number of ideas that the politicians could recommend, and measures that are already in place, but these were rather disparate, not generalized measures. We saw measures taken by the education authorities in certain regions, certain towns, certain associations. There was nothing particularly clear, and nothing that could be reproduced in a safe way. And the current and future developments, and what they said was what they wanted was they wanted the Commission to be able to influence current work in Europe. And he was right, because you mentioned this. While when we submitted the report, two major texts, the Digital Service Act was implemented, and the Digital Market Act, which, as you know, is the legal tool in Europe, which means that they can inflict major fines on some of the big players. It lasted for 6 months, but since Donald Trump has come in, the majors don't give a damn about what Europe sends as a message. But we have elements of that kind. There's a political impact. The digital commissioner, Thierry Breton, he was sent away because he took initiatives on behalf of the president. So there are some very important political challenges. This represents a lot of money and a lot of influence. So that was the objective. The president said, I would like there to be a consensus emerging from the Commission, and I'd ask you to converge, because he understood that we had went around the table, and when people had finished speaking, he realized it was going to be difficult because each of the different members maybe had rather diverging views and goals. He asked us to come to some kind of consensus to assess the effectiveness of the measures and define a regulatory doctrine and propose a strategy, and that's what we did. So the scope of consideration was screens, and of course there are a lot of screens. It's telephones, tablets, it's television. There are a lot of screens. So where do we stop? So we decided to put all screens in, and children, what is actually a child? We started from the very young child, from pregnancy, because there's the whole question of techno-interference, and there's some very interesting data on that, to the end of adolescence and adulthood. And for the organization of the work, we spent more than 3 months in the end, because 3 months was not enough. We thought about the subject, we took stock of the situation, we had interviews with something like 250 people, 100 experts and 150 young people, to try to formalize and ensure that the data should be able to be summarized and reported. And the report was submitted to the President on the 30th of April 2024. That was the methodology that we adopted. So the main findings, we met 3, 4, 5 times a week, sometimes very early in the morning or later in the evening, because we were all working at the ministry, the finance ministry in Bercy, in the offices of the Secretary of State for Digital Technologies. The main findings, first of all, children like their screens, live in a world in which screens and digital technology play an increasingly prominent role. Technology and digital arrived with a very, very fast, dizzy speed. It's come in at that speed over the last 20 years. There is perhaps a problem. People began to realize, well, to begin with, we only saw the example of having a television in your telephone in your pocket and so on. It takes time for people to realize, generally speaking, and there's a triggering effect, and that was the case of this report. Children are exposed to screens at home, more than, on average, 10 screens per household. Count how many screens you have at home. It's easy to get to 10 screens. You count them. More than 10 screens. Perhaps we've got 2 televisions, and each person has their mobile phone and so on. And then the computer in the satchel and the tablet and so on. So we easily get to 10. At school, we use screens and IT as a teaching aid. A lot of work done there. It was difficult for them to accept our recommendations through the equipment that they have for their own use. An average of 1.6 personal screens for 7 to 12-year-olds and 2.6 for 13 to 90-year-olds. And at 10.5, 34% of children have a smartphone already. 10.5. Because the digital workspaces are imposed by the national education system. And almost everywhere in public spaces, you have more screens as an interface between us and the rest of the world. The average time spent looking at screens is steadily increasing. This is some data, the ELF report conducted by Jonathan Bernard that I mentioned ago, and shows what I showed a moment ago, the first smartphones. This is data that comes from a cohort that was monitored over time. The scientific consensus, and I'm going to look at this perhaps not in a very detailed way, but we looked at a lot of things in the literature. What comes out for the negative effects of the digital is sleep as the first victim. Not only young people, all of us are victims when you have your phone, where instead of reading, of course, when you scroll down, this diminished quantity and quality of sleep with the disruption of circadian cycles, etc., with knock-on effects on physical and mental health and learning. But we have a lot of data behind that, and the literature converges very much on that. Sedentary lifestyles and lack of physical activity, which are cardiovascular risk factors that themselves promote overweight, obesity, type 2 diabetes, and all the chronic diseases that result from them. So we've got pathologies that we've seen in young adults and late teenagers that we only saw in older people before. For example, we asked Professor Carré, who he produced the big report saying walk 30 minutes a day. He did a lot of work. He explained that he could see pathologies in young people that you only saw in middle-aged people some time ago. And high-level sportsmen in 2025, they are lazier than sportsmen and sportswomen from the 1950s. So sports activity, which was their daily activity, they're like everybody else. They sit down and they can be sedentary. So sport is not a guarantee of mobility. You can be not a sportsman, but you can be mobile and be more healthy. So this is Mobile means moving every day. It means getting up every 75 minutes and walk for 10 minutes, or at least 10 minutes standing up. That's what he reported. This is a generational effect. Vision problems, in particular myopia, but also problems that may be linked to the retina and the exposure to blue light. We had two ophthalmologists who said that if we continued, we were going to have generations of people who are short-sighted. Questions that haven't yet been answered by science but were raised concerning the effects of exposure to electromagnetic waves, and particularly the possible carcinogenic effect and the effect on fertility. There's some contradictory data, but there is this principle of precaution and the possible impact of the exposure to substances which are present in digital devices. I can't remember, we interviewed a professor who said that what we call virtual, there's nothing more as material as virtual. The data is stored in places which are material, physical. There's physical pollution involved. When you talk about digital and virtual and so on, you have places in the world where we store all this data, and that is pollution because that data is stored using rare earth materials, and they need to be mined, and it's extremely polluting to use rare earth elements. So, of course, we had a lot of data that was pretty frightening. Observations in the field and studies on the consequences of screens on the neurodevelopment of children and adolescents. This was a polemic subject because people read us, but we didn't talk about problems connected with screens. We had, when you have a child, and this was the recommendations in the 70s and 80s, to have a child develop, the idea was that the screen would be a world opening up to the child. It's quite the contrary. Physical interactions, human interactions, can help children evolve. But if you're just sitting in front of a screen, you have children who don't use language, they don't have interactions. They're also almost on the autistic spectrum, even if they're not. And a lot of people have worked, as speech therapists have worked to try and repair the damage caused by this kind of activity. The available evidence also calls for increased vigilance with regard to technoference. For example, all the people around the caregivers and children, they shouldn't have telephones in their white coats. And adolescence is also a vulnerable period in terms of psychological and behavioral development for the brain and emotional overreaction, and also issues of major influence linked to trends, sex, being thin, digital loyalty, with the feeling that those people who are behind the screen have more importance than those actually living next to you in the house. That's why it's sometimes extremely complicated to understand how people take action. When you have people who every day can be accessible to reasonable argument, but when they're working with virtual people, the feeling is that they are kind of almost robots and manipulated remotely. The concept of screen addiction as such is not yet recognized by science, but it's useful perhaps to work in this area for very simple reasons. You can be an addict of bottles, but you're an addict of the content. But you can see that there are profiles. When we looked at what young people were doing, some people began to scroll on Instagram or TikTok. And when they get tired, they go and look at 1 or 2 hours and look at WhatsApp. And when WhatsApp's finished, they go and see whether there's in LinkedIn maybe some jobs that are still available. And you can see that the common tool is the device, the object itself, which becomes almost a kind of fetish product, and people become totally attached to the product. So the idea is not completely idiotic. So is it the content rather than the container? But generally speaking, screens, and particularly the use of social media, seem to be beyond the benefits they can bring in certain situations. They're additional risk factors. Of course, you can't kill the screen, you can't kill digital, you need to regulate it. And through these commissions and the results that I'm going to be showing you, there are recommendations. We don't want to do away with digital resources, but sometimes in certain places we think we should. For example, when I became chair of this commission, I was contacted by the Swedish Minister of Health, who explained that in Scandinavia, and particularly in Sweden, they wanted to go all digital in education, the education system. And they had children who were totally disconnected from society. And it was extremely complicated because we had pathologies linked with this digital experience. And they stopped all of this and they went back to chalk and the blackboard. So he was quite curious to see which direction we were going to move in our work. So the main findings: uncontrolled access to screens by children and insufficient regulation of the content to which minors may be exposed, particularly pornography and violence and phishing. They raise questions about their place in society and the question of stereotypes. We can see influencers talking about how to be thin, how to commit suicide, and so on. All of these things can be found in the space. The risks of isolation caused by algorithmic bubbles, we talked about that. We heard all the TikTok people, Apple and so on, we called them all in for an interview, and they all had the same discourse. They said, we have nothing to hide. Every time that we have an object that's on the market, they say that it's under the responsibility of the parents, and of course there's individual freedom, so everybody has the same discourse. Simply, the algorithmic bubble, which was developed a lot by TikTok, is perhaps the recipe to make gold out of lead. So those people who've invented that on TikTok, everybody does it. And you have engineers there, neuropsychologists who work for those industries, and they came to our interviews, and nobody gave us the recipe for Coca-Cola. It was a bit like that. But the dangers associated with paedophile crime have never been so high. So this is the main findings. Europe, we saw, has the GDPR. We know that that is essential, the DMA and the DSA. In France, there's a law called the SREN law on influence, which is never respected. There's a law on parental control. Who knows this law about parental control for children under 15? Nobody uses it. The Marc law. It's not very well harmonized. There's some information. The information is not very well harmonized, and dissemination is rather uncoordinated. There's a problem there. There's no decision-making body and no binding body. So the proposals, and again, I'm not going into detail, but I'll give them. This report is available on the site, so you can look for that. It's PDF. The issue of screens necessarily calls for a systemic response involving the whole of society: parents, schools, educators, public authorities, digital players, associations, and so on. So we asked for there to be a real school of parents to teach older people, because quite often children are more familiar with these objects and these devices than parents. Protect children and adolescents from the harmful effects of digital technology and provide training and support, and question the way society is organized in terms of the place given to children and teenagers, and change it. That's important. This is what we heard. For young people said, yes, but okay, we can meet in these spaces. We don't have to go out. Before the arrival, the dangers were in the street. Now the danger is behind the screen. We've completely changed the paradigm, and we're increasingly living in a society which doesn't allow children in. We have planes, we have holidays, adults-only hotels, and so on. You check, it's a phenomenon which has become widely disseminated over the last few years. We have the feeling that children and adolescents no longer have this space, and they found their space. It's this digital space. So the solutions need to have a better appropriation of these tools by society. So we made a number of proposals, around 6 areas, representing objectives that the strategy needs to be organized around. The proposals for the commissions are organized according to these 6 areas. First, to tackle addictive and restrictive designs. This was the principle. We decided to talk about addictogenic practices. Sometimes we have the impression that it's like a comfort blanket to protect children rather than control them, because otherwise we could look at the example. When you give the keys of a car to an 18-year-old teenager, they learn to drive, and children need to learn how to evolve in a digital world. They have to accept and organize the progression of screen and digital use, prepare young people to be independent in their use of screens and better equip, train and support parents, teachers and educators and establish an ambitious government system. That was what was lacking when I submitted the report to the President of the Republic. 2 weeks later, he gave money for that. So we're perhaps moving in the right direction. I remember there was Gabriel Attal, who was minister, and Marina Ferrari. They've disappeared. Some of them come back, and so on. The ministers come and go at the moment. But we started out again with something rather disparate. We didn't have somebody who could be recognized and identified as this person who was responsible for studying screen use and so on. Again, I'm not going to go through this in detail. The 6 areas for proposals are here. There are 4 important elements. I'm just going to spend some time on this one because a lot of people talked about this, the protect young children under the age of 6 from exposure to screens, particularly in childcare settings like nurseries and nursery schools. Only allow access to ethical social networks. We found 2 or 3. Organize a gradual introduction to mobile phones. Before 11, no phone. From 11, mobile phones without an internet connection, 13 years, connected phones without access to social media, and from age 15, additional access to ethical social media. Of course, there have been some evolutions, some changes, because you see recently the President of the Commission suggested that there should forbid access to social media because of various incidents that have taken place. A lot of things are happening. And here you have the elements of the report that I showed a moment ago. And again, I'm not going to go into detail. These are the various areas for proposals. Number 6 is interesting. We also asked that there should be a kind of fund which would make it possible to fund research and associations working in the protection of children, because we realized that the digital industry is so powerful that it funds almost 100% of associations. In France, there are associations which are financed 70% by publicity people and so on. I thought that's scandalous. We need to have a fund that is distributed with a call for proposals for associations so that they can be sufficiently funded, and particularly have a lot of communication to work with parents. I think it's a social project, as the President of the Republic wanted. Thank you very much for your attention.
Question? Yes. Do you
Oui, ma question est de savoir
My question, what do we know about the mechanisms, the reward mechanisms when you scroll through a screen? There's a pleasure, of course, involved in if people spend so much time on their screens, because there is pleasure. What do we know about the mechanisms, the neurological mechanisms? We know that dopamine and so on is maybe involved. What do we know about that with regard to screens? Have there been any studies? What can we say about that? Why is there so much pleasure to be got from tactile screens and so on? There are some elements that we have and some information which has been validated, including by experimental methods and imagery. When you have an algorithm, it has the ability to address you yourself, because when you put in your information as you connect to the subjects that you're interested in, if you're interested in literature, you like Proust or Victor Hugo, you're going to spend a lot more time with Proust and Victor Hugo. You will receive publicity for Proust and Victor Hugo and an increasing volume as a function of your taste. Those are the algorithms that I mentioned. And you will regularly be contacted for short periods of time on the same subjects as your interest, but also, in the end, the short nature of the message, which encourages you to reconnect once again to go and find the same feeling, the same principle as when you take a drag from your cigarette. Nicotine is rapidly eliminated from your system, but so you want to take another drag on your cigarette to get that pleasure again. The reward system is stimulated all the more if it is stimulated intensely, quickly, with subjects that you are interested in to start with. And then the system just snowballs. It's the same as with substance use or gambling or gaming or other activities like sex or when you're eating a nice cake or something or chocolate or whatever you like. It's the same system. And the principle of these algorithms behind the screens is exactly that. Where we have, of course, where the industry, the digital industry has become fantastic, is that the technological progress has made it possible for them to better individualize their offer through some monstrous calculations so that they can do this better and better or worse and worse, if you like, to get through to you.
Thank you. Let us move to the next presentation, which I think will be from Alex Allache. Allache. Okay.
First part.
So, do you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. Tu vas?
Oui. Bonjour à tous, je suis le docteur Pierre-Emmanuel ROZIER, donc je suis pédopsychiatre et addictologue. Je m'intéresse tout particulièrement aux addictions comportementales, l'addiction à l'exercice physique et l'addiction aux écrans. Et dans le cadre d'un travail partenaire.
In the framework of the Town Hall of Po, with the ex-Prime Minister, the University of Bordeaux and the Pyrenees Hospital Centre in Po, we have managed to implement a research project, a major project, about the prevalence of screen use in the city of Po. The aim of this, not to stigmatize and say people are wrong, telling people that they're addicted to the screens. We're trying to look at how people use screens on their daily lives, and it's a project which is based on what Amine was saying before about the reality, the concept of stolen time. If you spend 56 hours per week on your screen, 20 for work, 36 for leisure, then we can calculate this. 122 days a year and 27 years during your life. In the 1980s, there was only the television, so with The Simpsons and Splitting Image. But time hasn't increased over the last 30 years. Time is what it is. So we have our time has been stolen. Children's are formed by multi-modality, by touch, by all the different senses. But they're now locked into algorithms controlling these loops all the time that control our children. So we wanted to try to the DSM-5 use disorder criteria. We had this morning about the pathological use of the internet. The Bordeaux team is working on screen use disorder. The context goes back to 2015, and with the town in the south of Gironde, the town of Martignas, with the support of local representatives, it was disseminated manually to the population. And we have the internet gaming disorder adapted to screens. We have a high level of equipment and use, regular use. A major proportion of the population had this disorder. We don't all have access, we don't all use tobacco, but we almost all use screens, so all ages. With 5 different criteria, there were 5 positive criteria. We had a rare phenomenon, 1.7%. Things have changed a lot over the last 10 years. The criteria were there was unidimensionality and a good psychometric ability. So we wanted to do a new project between the city and the hospital, a participative project in the city of Po. Po is this small city not far from here on the other side of the Adour River. It's 80,000 inhabitants. We opened up the survey to French speakers. So the city of Po, French speakers from the city of Po. And we tested new diagnosis criteria. adapted to SAMC screens, including craving. The need that if we say today, if I'm going to the shelter, then I use Google Maps. If I need to find out how much money I've got, I go into the bank. We use it for so many different uses today. We wanted to describe how screens are used in a sample of the general population, by type of screen and activity, and by characterizing the non-problematic and problematic users using DSM-5 diagnosis criteria for usage disorders adapted to screens. And with this work we carried out had three partners: the University of Bordeaux, the SAMC laboratory, the hospital centre, and the city of Pau. It's local work. We had to disseminate this information, serve it to as many people as possible, so that we communicate as widely as possible. We implemented different digital tools, we're talking about screens, so we have to move on as well. So we use QR codes with a YouTube video. I regularly make videos, and it's a tool with a URL address. The address, if you click on it, this was created by the digital department of the city of Pau, and in a click you can get to the CNRS, except we don't have an internet connection. This would get you onto the CNR, the French National Research Centres. This shows the legitimacy of the project, the references. We carried out a dissemination campaign with flyers, with local media press kits, with conferences. We did all we could to maximize the number of people who took part and the support we received. And we managed to get the whole of the city of Pau behind us. And this enables us to, through a very strong communication, what are the effects of too much exposure to screens? Let's help research to better understand. We wanted to get people involved in this participative project. It was RD dissemination campaign. We want to educate people, parents. In 2007, the iPhone didn't exist before 2007. We don't know what the limits are, and even less so to protect our children. The aim of this project was to evaluate and also to intervene. So we created a PowerPoint. Thank you, Laurent, Amine, for the work they did enable us to have references in this. It's a qualitative, validated reference made available to families and for professionals, for anyone who wants to look at the risks involved with excessive screen use. We have 10 behavioral criteria. If you see your battery low in the morning, if you don't have a network, if you can't answer a call, if the screen was broken, but you don't want to be separated from your phone for 1 or 2 days while it gets repaired. All of these are signs of dependence, overexposure, and we're all subject to these because we use them regularly. Notifications, take them all off. You're going to go on your favorite applications anyway. All these, we don't need. You don't know that someone. You don't need to know that someone has died on the other side of the planet through an instant notification. To go beyond the dissemination of this RDRD, you can still be included, and you go onto the webpage. It's 0 to 90-year-olds. We need as many people as possible, not just people who think they're very widely exposed to screens. We don't want only people who think they are addicted. We want as many people as possible to say about. In October 2025, we've had 6,050 visits, 3,643 questions opened, 98.8 have accepted to take part in the questionnaire, which means 300,643 questions filled in. The average time is 12 minutes. So please, this evening, help us by giving 12 minutes for the benefits of our children. And after cleaning the database, this gives 3,539 usable questionnaires. We also evaluated the PR, what enables us to questionnaire followed up the data and all the communications to get a map of what's happening in cities similar to the size of Po. Here are the preliminary results. Axel, I'm just a gardener. Axel is a botanist. If you want to talk to him about this later. Today, we have 3 samples. A third in Po, a third in the urban area, and a third worldwide French speakers. And we know where they're from. In terms of age groups, children's screen, ironically, we actually have more adults who've filled in this. 83.2% adults, 9.5 teens, and 7.3% children. So everyone is worried about our children's future in terms of screen use. When we do a major study, nothing. Even the Ministry of Education, we're still waiting for the results of the Ministry of Education survey. If we look at the time daily screen use, we can see that smartphones is used 90%, 80% teens, and 30% by children. 0, 12, 12, 13, 18, and 18 plus. We can see that daily screen use is increasing year on year. 5-year-olds spend 3 to 4 hours a day. 12-year-olds over 5 hours a day. This is the original calculation. If we look who spends more than 5 hours per day on screens, we've got 12.7% of adults, and this is a problem that we've identified. Adults say computers, it could be at work. If you spend 5 hours on your computer and you're on messengers and WhatsApp and other things, then you're multitasking. So this is multi-screening. With teens, 9%, over 5 hours a day on a smartphone, and children who were born before 1986, this is much lower. Over the last 5 years, we can see about when people are on we're on the television, we're looking at the smartphone as well. When teens are together, they're all Snapchatting away. So when we look at the population, the adult population, which is multi-screening at the same time, we can see that 15.4% see a problem with this. And when 85% say they're not concentrated enough. This is incoherent. It's just become a habit and that we all accept. In the results, the significant results, we can see the prevalence of different criteria. We can see in the population 17.3% 25% who at least have one criterion of addiction. Two addictions, 20.5%. And you can see the figures increase. If you look at the frequency here, you can see that people spend too much time than planned. Doom scrolling, flow, it has a cognitive impact if you're spending half an hour on Instagram every day. And you talked about sports people. We have a lack of precise gestures by high-level sports people. So they're less capable in their sport. I'd like to pass the floor to my colleagues. Before I do, the Martinez study, 10 years later, adults 77.2 have at least one distinct positive criteria over the last 12 months. Teens is 5.1% and children 5.1%. We can't say things were better before. That's not the aim of the study. But we need to accompany as best as possible the youngest members of the population and how to use screens correctly. We think that our children are safe at home, but perhaps we think that they're talking to a friend who's 17 years old, but in fact, that friend turns out to be somebody who's 54 years old. All your data is being sold as well permanently. All that confidential data that you and your kids are putting out there is being sold. For example, and this is the perspectives. We have everything we need. The study is not finished yet, so we're going to continue. The RDRD is available on the project ecrans.podesfr website. We're going to provide feedback to the inhabitants of the City of Po. We're going to act as we're going to relay the information with the Ministry of Education. And we're going to propose actions to local institutions via the hospital and the SAMSI support. This is what we were talking about with you before. We won an award for a communication strategy in Po. We had a digital research approach which was very innovative, and all of this is available to you. It's all transparent to show the impact of. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'd like to pass the floor over to our doctoral student. Are there any questions? You talk about the Ministry of Education, but you've never talked about family doctors. I said that the Ministry of Education, all these caregivers, if you have in terms of the family doctors, I've done IPC training. I'm a psychiatrist. And we need to give them the information necessary and train them in terms so that they work in a non-stigmatizing way. These children who are addicted to screens, they need associations, they need play areas. All this work is being done with family doctors. And do you include this as part of your consultations? I work in a hospital that I've had parents who come and say, "Doctor, my child uses too many screens." So when you talk about screens, you talk about. I'm an addictologist. The screen project was originally based on the fact that children who were mostly exposed, it was a way of saying whether it wasn't their parents who had the addiction. There's the rule of the parents need to educate their children because children reproduce the example of their parents. And when we tell children to stop looking at their screens, but the parents are looking at them, then it's not credible. The American media plan to reestablish rules. Thank you. You need, and the first one to say, we need to impose limits.
Ok. Bonjour à tous.
Good evening. I'm Axel ALLACHE. I'm a second-year PhD student at the University of Bordeaux, and I'm doing a PhD in neuroscience. And in the SANSI laboratory, I'm going to be talking about screen use disorder and some diagnostic exploration of this. I'm going to do this quite quickly and talk about addiction. You all know about addiction. It's addictive behaviors that are developed or compulsive use, and this has consequences which are negative on their lives and encourage these people to stop. And there are relapse rates of between 40 to 90%, and craving, which is defined as intense persistence and involuntary desire to consume, has been identified as a key factor in relapse and may play a major role in the development of addiction. In behavioral addictions today, we have gaming and online video games. Even though online video games are recognized in Section 3 of the DSM-5. But what about screen use disorder? When we talk about using screens, we're talking about two different things. As everybody knows, there are devices that are used, like telephones, computers, tablets, smartphones, and other devices, and the applications and the activities that you do using these screens. Could be social networks, could be sending messages, looking at videos, or playing video games. And in the report that Amine BENYAMINA and his colleagues published, we observed that there was screen times which were very high in the younger people, and we know that in the general population, 42% of the population consider that they have an excessive screen time, and in the literature, we know that there are problems including depression, visual impairment, anxiety, sleep problems, and so on, associated with excessive use of screens. So a question, of course, that everybody is asking, and we're talking about from time to time, is where does the addictive potential come from? Is it the screen itself, or is it the activity? The important thing to note is that the two need to be taken into account. You can have an addiction to the device as such, the screen, whether it's a smartphone, which can cover various different activities, but also certain people are going to have specific disorders linked to a specific activity, which could be video games, sending messages, or going onto the social networks. So you need to note that a screen is all the time with us. So we have a smartphone in our pocket, and this creates positive strengthening reinforcement because of its availability, and it becomes extremely accessible. And that leads to an increase in the addictive potential of the device itself. Now, if we look at the semiology and diagnosis, today there are several symptoms which have been reported, such as continuing despite the negative consequences, loss of control and tolerance, loss of interest in other activities, and craving. These are the symptoms that people have reported that they have had with their problematic screen use. That's why there are several scales that have been developed in terms of problematic screen use, and there was a meta-analysis showed that there are more than 70 different diagnostic scales just for smartphones. So there's a lot of literature, but no scientific consensus. And yet craving is often absent from most of these scales, even though it is frequently reported by screen users. So we asked this little question: could we have similarities and differences between substance use disorders and screen use disorders? For example, as we have craving in substance use disorders and in screen use disorders, perhaps there could be similarities between the two. And that's why our research hypothesis was that excessive screen use can be associated with behaviors and symptoms which are similar to those observed in substance use disorders. And several diagnostic criteria adapted from the DSM-5 can frequently be observed in individuals who are reporting problematic screen use. So it's a study which has an exploratory goal, and the goal of our study was to explore the presence of DSM-5 diagnostic criteria adapted for screen use among users who report problematic screen use compared to those reporting that they have no problems. So to do this, this is the process of recruitment. We have 3 different cohorts. The first is the ATHS-2025 cohort. We recorded 330 subjects. That's addicts in Aquitaine. We haven't yet started recording. And the PO cohort that we've just had, we have more than 3,000 subjects. And today I'm going to present the results that have been obtained with the ATHS-2025 cohort. Methodology of the study, we began with an adaptation of all the criteria of substance use disorder to screen use disorder. We took a number of criteria like craving, such as the use of alcohol, and we adapted that to users of screens. We did this with the 11 criteria, and that gave rise to a scale that we can then use and test it and see if it works or not. All these questions were addressed to the Aquitaine addiction cohort, which began in 1994. These are people who are seeking treatment for addiction and who have at least one substance use disorder or a behavioral disorder. For this study, which began in 2023, we assessed the diagnosis criteria of DSM-5 and to identify the kind of problematic screen and the kind of problematic activity. In our analysis process, what we did was we asked the first question to people that came in and asked them whether over the past 12 months they have repeatedly felt that the use of screens was problematic. And if so, we asked what screen was involved and what activity. And if they say yes, that if they do recognize they've had problems with their screens, in that case, they are part of the problematic screen use, UPE in French group. The others were non-screen use, problematic screen use group. So we then carried out analysis in the 11 screen use disorder groups. So we had 333 subjects, as I said, with average age of 39 years, 32% women. In terms of the results, among the people that we recruited, we have 96 participants who reported that they had problematic screen use. So that's about 30%. And in terms of the number of criteria out of the 11, on average, they report 5.5 criteria, which is quite a high figure. Conversely, or moreover, rather, of these 96 participants, because we're looking at this particular recruitment, 24 people reported that they were actively seeking treatment for potential addiction to screens. For participants who did not report problematic screen use, we had 237, that's about 71%. For that group of people, the average number of criteria was 1.2 out of the 11. And that shows that the scale can differentiate between people who are reporting that they have problems with their screens and people who report that they don't have problems with their screens. This is a graphic distribution to illustrate what I've just said. To continue the analysis, I wanted to focus on the screen use disorder group, problematic screen use group, and we wanted to observe the frequency of appearance of the criteria as my colleague did. And we did this with people who report they have problematic screen use. And among those, this is the prevalence with the 11 criteria. And the 4 main criteria that came up were the quantity or excessive duration, difficulty to stop, time spent, and craving. These 4 criteria reflect a loss of control, and that's generally the central component that we find in all addictions, including substance use disorders. This is another graph which represents the main activities that were problematic, linked with screens in the problematic screen use group. If we asked them to choose one activity, if they said they had problematic screen use, they were asked what for them would be the most problematic activity, and they couldn't select several activities. So the majority group is social media, with 58% of the people concerned. We then wanted to observe the frequency of the criteria depending on the type of activity, because we wanted to observe whether the activity as such was going to modify our distribution of appearance of these criteria. So we took the 3 majority groups, which are social networks, watching series and videos, and video games. And what we could find is that the 4 same criteria of loss of control, duration, and difficult to quit, and craving were predominant with regard to the other criteria. We can also note, for example, that for craving, it's more frequent among video gamers, a difference that we observed in our data. And these results suggest that the loss of control criteria are a cross-cutting marker of problematic screen use, whatever the activity involved. So to take this further, as I said, we carried out analysis just on the addict-acquis cohort, but there's a very large cohort recruited in Po, and we're going to be starting also with a canopy cohort. I think Mr. Lacombe has presented this, and we're going to carry out various kinds of analysis, IRT analysis and symptom network analysis. IRT analysis enables us to verify that our set of 11 criteria does measure a latent trait, that is addiction, and the position of craving in relation to screens. And it can also show what is the place of the criteria amongst the other criteria, to see what is the criterion which occurs earliest when there is disorders, or which come later in terms of severity or gravity. The second analysis is symptom network analysis, and this is done in cooperation with Dr. Gall, and this means that it can represent a network composed of nodes and edges. And nodes, as we can see on the graph, those are the little circles which represent all the symptoms, the 11 symptoms, and the bridges, which represent the interactions between the symptoms. So the goal is to examine at which point certain criteria can be more central than others. In our case, we can examine the centrality of craving. So why did we want to carry out this kind of analysis? Very simply because these analyses have already been carried out by our laboratory in substance use disorder. So the goal was to compare the results obtained in substance use disorder with our results on screen use disorder. And we can see if we find the same distributions or different distributions. Our hypothesis is that craving will play a central role in addiction to screens, and that suggests that it's important among the 11 diagnostic criteria. Moreover, that means that we can support the trans-diagnostic role of craving across substance use disorder and screen use disorders. It could also support the existence of a link between substance addictions and behavioral addictions. And I'd like to thank you for your attention. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate. Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation and the very useful data. We have a few minutes still to interact on this subject. Do you have any questions you'd like to ask of all the speakers? Marc POTENZA, we have the opportunity, the chance to have one of the most well-known representatives. I've got some questions. You look at screen use as a whole, but isn't there a distinction that needs to be made between using screens for work, for example, where you can think about what you're doing, and a kind of recreational use of screens, or informative without necessarily involving any major thinking about screen uses? Shouldn't they be separated into two different groups?
When some of the main diagnostic groups, the main committees that were working on diagnoses related to screen media activity considered the behaviors, as was being discussed, they thought that the phones or the computers were more the delivery device. The internet was the delivery device, and the content should be the focus of the condition. Hence, at the time of DSM-5, the substance use disorder work group thought that the most data existed for internet gaming as being problematic, because there had been reports of deaths in internet cafes in Asia where people did not attend to their bodily needs and passed in massive gaming sessions. Children were left unattended in their cars and passed while their parents were playing video games. So this became the focus of the condition, and as this was mentioned, it was included in Section 3 as a research criterion, research condition, rather than in Section 2, the clinical condition. By the time that ICD-11 was being discussed, a work group met for, beginning in 2014, asking the question whether screen media activities, internet use behaviors could form the basis of disorders. And that too, the decision was made to focus on the behaviors. And looking at even within a behavior, so getting back, for example, to work versus non-work, one can think of different types of social media and how to define social media, because people engage in different texts and as a way of connecting socially, for example. So the boundaries of what is social media, what is gaming, what is gambling, these have all been becoming blurred over time. For example, social casino games are at the convergence of gambling, gaming, and social media. So how does one specify these domains, and how does one look at the type of harm that is related to any one activity? These are all important questions. So taking approaches like the item response theory, like the network analysis, these are helpful to do with this data set and with other data sets, so that we can better define the groups that are being affected, or define the behaviors that are most harmful, and intervene most effectively. However, things have been going very rapidly with the development of digital technologies, including with AI, and how do we best address these concerns has been changing very rapidly. So important points that are raised, and no easy solution.
Après, une autre forme de réponse, c'est que nos
Another form of answer is when our grandparents worked on machines all day, they didn't come home and work on their machines at home. So if we spend our whole day working on a computer, we should wonder whether we want to go and scroll down in our computer when we come home in our leisure time. So the important question is how we transformed great gameplay, the fact that you have a challenge which provides a reward. In gambling, for example, when young people on Fortnite buy, I don't know about Fortnite, by $6.99, it's a number of pockets which give rise to a certain number of skins that they can win with different values. What does the child do? It's a gambling game. It's like roulette. So the problems of behavioral addiction and cyber addiction, it's not addiction to the device if it's turned off. It's purchasing, it's pornography, texting, and as you said, the social networks today, we don't even know what is the definition of a social network today. If you have TikTok, TikTok is a social network, but also binge watching. So we have scrolling of videos with also dialogue and communication. So there's a kind of magma there of different uses. So we can talk about cyber addiction with pornographic objects, video games, social networks, communications, and so on. All of these are today part of the daily experience of human beings. It's a reality. So I think that it's a rather total overall global model. Thank you. Perhaps something, again, that we could all agree on. There are several types of influencers. We have classical influencers, perhaps selling their charms or their habits, which echo our functions in the way we are. But no, we can also find influencers of all kinds. We have influencers on reading. The number of readers who they go to these sites and they're encouraged to read, and they given advice about good books to read. I'm not the only one, but I follow influencers about recipes for cooking and so on. Now you have different types of influencers. Sometimes you have influencers who do recipes, but they're also half naked. You don't know whether you're interested in the cooking or you're interested in the cook. I could take that example. It's rather trivial, but it explains very clearly that in the end, as Marc POTENZA said very clearly, there's no frontier anymore. There is a tool which has developed at dizzying speed, and there are captive populations, and there's also a form of acceleration of the offer, and that means that all these elements respond to addictive processes in some way. Important thing with regard to exposure of minors, we could see what's happened in Gaza a year ago. We had children who 2 clicks away could see scenes of rape, torture of children, children burnt in bombings and so on. But we also have a campaign on the television saying, you see something that's bad, talk to your parents. But these are children of less than 10 years old who are constantly exposed to pornographic content. This is not the kind of porn that you see on Sunday evening. It's deep throat, it's gang bang, it's horrible. So there's a modification of practices in terms of violence, sexuality, prostitution. Young girls, it's very difficult for them. So we can see all of this. There's a kind of modification of the functioning through this cyber exposure. The television, as it was in de Gaulle's day, was not a good thing, with just one channel. But now this is something which has completely disappeared. There's a liberalism in China, which is compared with American mercantilism. We in Europe are halfway between the two. Other questions? Sorry, I can't hear if he doesn't use a microphone. Thank you. I'd like to thank you for tackling this subject, which is an addictological bomb, which is even worse than some of the other projects that we're talking about, the substances we're talking about. You were talking about influencers, but I just wanted to give my own account of a personal experience. When I went to a show, you can have influencers that can be positive in terms of making people aware of the dangers of screens. This was an artist who did a show where she forbade smartphones as people went into the show. We had our smartphones, but they were closed up and we couldn't use them during the show or while we were waiting for the show. But this it comes down to what you were saying. There's no temporality anymore with screens at the moment. And we had to talk to each other while we were waiting and talk to the people next to us, creating links between us. And this is something which is lacking. And it's one of the current criteria of addictology. One of the lack of social links. But I'd certainly like to thank you because it's a very interesting subject, and I think it's going to be one of the main subjects for the years to come in terms of addictology. Thank you very much. Do you have other questions or other things that you'd like to add to the discussion? I think he said, why don't you use smartphone somewhere? And he said, because it's forbidden to forbid. That's a 1968 slogan. But this is reality in our practices. The fact that having your smartphone on the table is becoming a habit, but it's up to us to change that habit. I'm going to defend myself otherwise. I'm completely an addict, and I can claim this. If you have a solution, tell me. But I can't see a solution yet. So that's quite a responsibility. As Orson Welles said, the best way of dealing with temptation is to let yourself be tempted. But I'm trying. I'm trying. I'd like to finish on this question of influence. As doctors and health professionals, it's up to us to regain the area of influence, because in the COVID period, there was a variation of all these pseudo-mystic movements towards a new age movements. There are people recommending diets with raw vegetables and so on, all sorts of things, or saffron and so on. As doctors, if you have something interesting to do, go onto YouTube and you can see this kind of stuff for everybody. Information, all the psychiatric elements, it's up to us to feed our content into this so that people can have good quality information. Just a little extra thing to what you just said, the example with the halo effect. Steve Jobs, well, you like him or you don't, but he was an intelligent man. And Steve Jobs had cancer of the pancreas, which was discovered quite fortuitously at a stage when it was operable. And he was on internet, and he surfed on internet. I've nothing against nature people saying, they said, if you eat such and such a thing, then your cancer will stop and will be healed. 6 months later, he realized that that's not what was happening, and he wanted to be operated on, and it was too late. So one of the most intelligent men in the world can be manipulated, and unfortunately, he died from that. So it's very important that we doctors should adopt evidence-based medicine. But medicine is scientific, but the exercise of the medical art on the base of scientific data. So that's just an example on the effect of some of these influencers. Thank you, Patrick. More questions? So you can also give us a round of applause, just like in the next room. Thank you very much. So you have 7 minutes so you can charge up your mobile phones.